Hello there. When we enter the new year, spring can seem a long time away. But actually, there are some flowers that are starting to bloom. The first is one that many people may not even think of as a flower. I imagine that if you asked a child to draw a flower, they'd hardly come up with this. What we're actually looking at when we look at a catkin is a collection of, and somebody has counted these, an average of 240 flowers, all strung out like this, in what we as children used to call lamb's tails. Now, the catkin is wind pollinated. So these lamb's tails are ideally placed for the pollen to be caught by the wind and sent on its way. Also, it flowers very early in the year, before there's vegetation on the trees to impede the pollen. But the actual lamb's tails consist of male flowers. So where are the female flowers that are to be pollinated? Not by pollen from this plant, but pollen from another hazel, because hazels can't pollinate themselves. Well, if you look carefully, you will see the female flowers on this picture. There's one there, and then there's one to the right of it on the other twig. Such tiny flowers, they don't need to be gaudy. They haven't got to attract insects. They don't need to be scented for the same reason. They sit there waiting for the wind to blow some pollen onto them. So when they are fertilized, then nuts can grow. So that's the hazel, which can start to bloom even in December, as can this flower. Now, this may be a mystery to many people. They see it. Quite often what they see are patches, large patches of these evergreen leaves, growing so closely that they stop anything else from growing. And for that reason, some people don't like them. But in December, or perhaps a bit later, it begins to send up these flowers. And they're wonderfully scented with a sort of vanilla scent. It's actually the winter heliotrope. It's an introduction from Southern Europe, which was brought to this country in the early years of the 19th century to grow in gardens. Well, by the middle of that century, there were records of it having escaped. And now it's slowly increasing all over the countryside, especially on road verges. Now, whereas the catkin had male and female flowers on the same bush, the winter heliotrope has male and female flowers on separate plants. Remember, I said it was an introduction, and it appears that only male plants were brought to this country. So it's not spreading by seed. Instead, it's spreading from its rhizomes. These are the swollen underground stems that send up shoots and new roots. They slowly extend the extent of the patch. And if perhaps you're trying to tidy up a road verge or something, and you cut away some of the heliotrope, if you dump it somewhere else, then you'll simply start a new patch because the rhizomes will grow away there. So that's an introduction. And so, in fact, is this other January flower plant. What a pity it's not a native, but the evidence seems to be against it. It looks as if it was brought to this country at some point. It's first recorded as being grown in gardens in about the 15th or 16th century. But it's also at that time, in the early 1600s, that we begin to get the first published list of the wild flowers of this country. And sadly, the snowdrop isn't mentioned. And it's not mentioned in succeeding lists until we get to the middle of the 18th century, where it appears for the first time among the list of wild flowers. It's not only the literary evidence, though, that suggests that it's an introduction. Think about the way it's distributed. Now, celandines, primroses, bluebells, even wild garlic seems to grow abundantly across the countryside. And it'd be wonderful if snowdrops grew with the same abundance. But they're not widespread in that way. They just grow in patches. And the reason is that celandines and the like have been here for thousands of years since the end of the last ice age. The distribution of snowdrops is much more in keeping with their having been grown in gardens and then gradually colonized the wild, particularly from garden escapes and plantings. When you think about it, very often you find patches of snowdrops apparently growing in the wild, but actually not far from human habitation. Now, I've already mentioned the lesser celandine, and what a cheerful plant this is, with its bright yellow petals. Its leaves are sometimes marked with grey or silver patches. It flowers from the beginning of the new year with increasing enthusiasm as the days warm up into the spring, and then it just dies away and disappears for the rest of the year. The primrose, you would also have to say, is yellow, although of a very more subtle shade than the celandine. And it's one of my favorite plants. I even love the foliage, which, with its rather subdued color, seems to match that of the flower. You may find the first primroses in the autumn. That's not a sign of climate change, as some people think. It's always been like that in sheltered places, little microclimates. And then as we go through the early spring months, so more and more of them bloom, and they become one of our standard spring flowers, among some of the others that we'll look at in our next video. Thank you for watching.